Hello there from COP26 here in Glasgow. It's time for the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages of tomorrow's papers. Time to see what's making those headlines tonight with the political editors of The Sun and the Daily Mirror, Harry Cole and Pippa Crerar. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Great to see you here in Glasgow. We'll chat in a second. First of all, let's see what's on some of those front pages. We're going to start with The Guardian. Reporting that world leaders have agreed a deal to reverse global deforestation at today's COP26 climate summit here in Glasgow. That news breaking this evening. Well, the Telegraph leads with Her Majesty's message to world leaders at the conference, urging them to rise above politics. In fact, it's also the top story for The Times. Their headline, "Answer the call of future generations," urges the Queen. On to Harry's paper, The Sun, going with the monarch's tribute to the work of her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, in raising awareness about climate change. Height of hypocrisy. I think I said that, how they ended it. The Metro looks at the use of private jets by billionaires heading for COP26, their yachts as well. Moving away from the summit, the Mirror leads with an interview with an assisted dying campaigner who chose to take her own life after suffering from a long-term illness. So, Harry and Pippa here with us this evening. Great to see you. It's been a busy old day here in Glasgow, hasn't it? Why don't we start with the front page of the Daily Telegraph? In fact, most of the papers going with that video message from Her Majesty. A great shame that she can't be here in person. She wanted to be here. She was told to rest by doctors. So instead, she gave a video message for delegates and leaders, which they heard at around 7:30 tonight, looking rather wonderful in green, of course. What did you make, Harry, of that message? I thought it was rather poignant, actually.
Absolutely. Obviously, the Queen has been unwell. We know she's been told to rest by doctors, hence why she's not here. I thought it was a really touching moment in that speech, in that video message, where she says, you know, none of us are going to live forever. And I think it's the first time we've really heard our monarch talk in those terms. Obviously, she lost her husband this year, and she lays on the praise. It's an incredible moment, actually. We don't very rarely see Her Majesty speak in such honest and candid terms about her own family. And she very poignantly calls out Prince Charles for taking on that mantle that Philip started 50 years ago, talking about the environment, and Prince William. And rather pointedly, we point out tomorrow, no mention of Prince Harry, who is a keen environmentalist, talks about nature and Africa and elephants all the time, but a small snub there. But no, a really dramatic moment today. You've got you had David Attenborough, you had Boris Johnson, you had various world leaders, but there's just one that everyone pauses and listens to because she's met them all, she's seen them all, and she, for the last, better half of the last century. And no, it was sad she wasn't here to do it herself.
Yeah, in fact, why don't we slide in the front of The Sun as well, because as you mentioned, that tribute to Prince Philip, and a reminder really for all of us about his green credentials. Fill the green, the headline that The Sun's gone for. Pippa, what did you make of what she had to say? Do you think leaders here really will listen to her?
I think so. Having been in the opening ceremony earlier when Prince Charles, her son, stood up to speak, people really paid attention to what he had to say. And you can only think that when they were gathering for that reception, that rather more glittering reception later in the evening, that they would have had all ears open to her video message. And of course, this is not the first we've heard from the Queen on COP. A few weeks ago, she was overheard, she was caught on camera, suggesting that she was fed up with everybody, all these leaders, talking about it, all the rhetoric, but not actually coming up with any action. And, that's clear. If perhaps in more diplomatic terms in her video message tonight, it's clear that she really thinks that they need to rise above politics, and that actually, if you are dealing with what the future brings and thinking about future generations, and the quote on the Telegraph is about the world's children in future, then actually you need to show statesmanship, and you need to sort of step back from the politics of the situation, the geopolitics of, whose economy is going to be powered by coal and who wants to be at the front edge, the leading edge of new green technology, and all the other different geopolitical issues which are coming into play here. And you need to step back from it and take a much longer-term approach to the problems, one of the biggest problems that's facing us just now. And there's very few world figures particularly politicians, that could actually say something like that, and I think have the credibility because of their length of service and because of the long view that they take on these sorts of issues. They step back from the political fray to do that, and the Queen is one of them.
Pippa's absolutely right, because when you talk about, we're going to go net zero in 2050, or as Modi said today, 2070, Boris Johnson made a joke about still being Prime Minister when he's 95, but actually it is kicking the can down the road a little bit. All these promises, all the politicians now who are in this room might not be alive or might not be in office at a time when actually these things come through. And
Well,
it does
Modi
take...
would have to be 120,
Exactly,
wouldn't he?
and it does take a message from someone who has been, such a prominent figure of the last half century to go, guys, hang on, it is a little bit bigger than this. Think, and she has this dignity and authority which few elected politicians will ever have, and that is why she's such a sort of secret weapon, not even that secret, but such a powerful weapon for Britain to deploy on the world stage. And you think, if this climate change summit, which has all the weight of expectation upon it, without the royal family, the firm are out in force today. You had Kate and Wills and Camilla and Charles and everyone banging the drum for Britain. Without that, you'd think we'd be a much, much weaker power on the world stage.
Yeah, let's bring in the inside pages of the Sun as well. The headline, "The world is hot enough," which I rather liked, actually.
We've had some fun with this today.
Yeah, the James Bond sort of analogy, wasn't it? Saying that it's like James Bond sort of trying to diffuse a ticking time bomb. Earth peril like Bond film, he said it's like diffusing a huge bomb. Pippa, do you think Boris Johnson got the tone right today when he made his speech?
Well, he likes his metaphors, doesn't he? And certainly at the start of the speech, when he launched into this whole spiel about James Bond, there was a moment where I sat there and kind of thought, oh, I'm not sure if he's got the tone quite right on this. But he very quickly, he caught people's attention. And I guess if what he's trying to do with these sometimes quite outlandish metaphors is to get a spread on the Sun with a headline on that and reaching readers that people he might not otherwise reach, then I suppose it's job done. But he very quickly went into the sort of the more serious stuff and the really the apocalyptic vision that he's set out over the last few days of, if we don't get world leaders to somehow work together to keep rises in global temperatures down below the 1.5, or at least at the 1.5 degree warming that we're planning for, then we're going to see flooding, we're going to see droughts, we're going to see whole island nations being lost as cities descend under seawater. And, again, he made the point, actually, which the Queen later did, about not just our children, but their children in future, looking back at this moment in Glasgow and saying that this was the moment that we needed to make history, and we failed.
You mentioned Prime Minister Modi earlier. I mean, do you think he was listening to the speech? Because many here will be very disappointed in his pledge tonight.
Yeah, I think the fact is he has been brought to the table, and I imagine the 2070 offer isn't quite where people wanted it to be. Even Russia, even sort of China are talking, making noise about 2060. Obviously, Australia and Britain have signed up to 2050. It's a long way down into this century before any change will happen. I think Modi's a really interesting example because he is playing to both a domestic audience, a country that's having a bit of a wobble at the moment as well. And the fact is that the point he makes is that actually, countries like Britain and America, who basically invented this this stuff, we had a 200-year head start on the Industrial Revolution. We've been pumping out 200 years worth of coal, burning coal and pumping carbon into the atmosphere. And actually, the point he makes to both a domestic audience and an international audience is, hang on, we're playing catch-up. And if you do want us to go faster, it's going to cost you money. So, Boris Johnson's been doing the whip-around COP this year, and the Western powers basically saying we need 100 billion a year. And Modi's come around and said, nice opening offer. Right. If you want me to go faster, you've got to pay up.
And maybe, Pippa, it'll change in 2 weeks' time. Maybe he'll say, well, look, you've offered me this cash. I'll bring my 2070 down.
It's interesting that you say that. British officials tonight or earlier this afternoon were suggesting that they want to see India and China go further, and whether there's any sort of room for manoeuvre in the next fortnight, I think they're quite pessimistic about, but certainly over the next 12 months and years following that. And there was even some suggestion that this 2050 date that we've got in place, that we're all aiming for net zero emissions, could be brought forward, that if Britain and other leading developed nations say that perhaps 2045, then that might encourage countries like China and India to bring forward their deadlines, that it's not actually a fixed deadline, it's more of a starting point, and we'll see how it evolves from there.
And also the other thing, of course, is he did make a pledge today about green energy, didn't he? And a 50% pledge to get their power from green energy, which would be fantastic. Listen, we've only got a minute left, and I want to finish on this story in the Metro, talking about the hypocrisy of some of the billionaires who are here, height of hypocrisy, billionaires on their sort of private jets and boats. Does it matter that much? Isn't it more important the fact that they're actually here, that they're speaking to world leaders, that they're trying to get their message heard? Isn't that a bit more important than sort of cheap shots like this? Is that a cheap shot? I don't know.
I think it's a cheap shot. I think it's a very fair point to make. As someone who tried to get here on a train yesterday and spent the better part of 12 hours not getting here on a train, I can understand the pain. Look, you know, the Bezoses of this world are always going to be held rightly to a very high account. I think the billionaires and the politicians, the billionaires I have a lot less time for, sort of swanning up here, slightly greenwashing their reputations and generally, you know, trying to make themselves not be seen as evil Bond villains and billionaires around the world. Politicians, look, Boris Johnson was in Rome. He flew here from Rome. There's a big debate about whether he should fly back to London or get the train like the rest of us. But I think it is a bit of a sideshow when actually some of the startling facts, you walk around this place listening to fringe events and listening to speeches, some of the things that are going to happen in the next 15, 20 years makes this look a little bit like a sideshow.
Really quick thought, Pippa, on this from you.
Well, I think politicians, particularly the ones that are hosting the COP summit, should be showing leadership. And I think the fact that Boris Johnson is getting a plane back down to London, which is just a 4-hour train journey from Glasgow, really isn't showing the sort of leadership that you might expect, regardless of how green the fuel they're using or whether they're offsetting their emissions. I think it sends out a bad message.
It's not a great look, no. OK. Pippa, Harry, fantastic. Stay where you are. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up after the break, we're going to be looking at plenty more stories, including in The Telegraph, a cartoon play on the words, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man 2 fish and you annoy the French for a lifetime. Talking about that in a couple of minutes. Do stay with us. You're watching the press preview. We're live at COP26 in Glasgow. Harry and Pippa still with us. There's been an update in the fishing story, Pippa. Do you want to fill us in?
Well, this long-running, so it feels like it's long-running saga, probably in about 3 days or something, between Britain and France over post-Brexit fishing rights. Earlier this afternoon, we had Liz Truss suggesting that Britain would retaliate tomorrow morning if France went ahead with threats to bring in extra checks on cross-border trade. The whole thing was about to erupt. And then there was talks in Brussels. The EU arranged talks in Brussels this afternoon, early evening, trying to resolve the situation. And it looks like there's been a suspension of hostilities. Harry would say running up the right flag, probably, on France's behalf. But
who's back down?
France is back down.
They've given it 24 hours. There's going to be more talks tomorrow.
A ceasefire rather than a surrender. I think we discussed over dinner what we were going to call it.
So where's it going to go next, you think?
Look, back into where these things always go, into a sweaty basement room in the European Commission where lots of video calls and sort of smoke-filled rooms they used to be called in politics, but a back and forth and a bit of movement and a bit of a fudge on both sides, I suspect. But Macron's been tearing around for the last couple of weeks, making these outlandish threats. They've come to a bit of a head as they see the body language there. Then they're not best buddies as they have been previously. There's no denying that Macron, at the beginning of last week, was very firm that Tuesday would be when he started to pull the lever on all these various retaliation measures that he was going to put in. He found himself quite isolated over the weekend of the G20, where he ran to the top of the hill and realised the EU wasn't behind him, and he's slowly now climbing back. Big lunch and big talks in Paris on Thursday between Lord Frost, who's Boris's sort of Brexit henchman, and Clement Beaune, who's the sort of who's kind of a little bit like the Boris Johnson of French politics. He's very outspoken. He's very clownish. He has a turn of phrase, should we say? So it will be one that runs and runs. OK, and we'll finish with a story that's also on the front of the Times. Actually, this is another ongoing row, if you can call it that, about GPs and face-to-face appointments. What's the update there?
So there's a new study by the University of Cambridge amongst clinical experts suggesting that the increase in online consultations, web consultations in primary care has meant a really quite serious decline in the standard of diagnosis. And that obviously is a huge concern when you consider that pre-pandemic, the numbers of online consultations were tiny compared to the numbers. I think it's about 80% of consultations are online initially anyway at the moment. And the big fear, of course, is that there are serious diagnoses which can only really take place in person, whether it's cancer diagnoses, whether it's something to do with mental health, whether the GP really needs to be in front of a patient or the clinician needs to be in front of a patient, that are being missed.
20 seconds.
Boris Johnson can ride as high as he likes in the polls now, but 3 more years of people being very, very angry about the NHS, and it's the government's always going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, this, isn't it? Because for many people, of course, the online system has been working really well, and it means you can get an answer, you can get a prescription very quickly, but it's for those who perhaps aren't so savvy with the internet or whatever.
And often people end up in A&E when they should have seen it.
And some of you might just get missed. It's been lovely seeing you both in the flesh, hasn't it? What a change, rather than speaking to you over Zoom. Harry, Pippa, thank you very, very much indeed.